So I guess you can start. Welcome everyone to this really very special situation for us for having Karin Harasa with us today. Uh, and we're taking the advantage that Karin is doing a sort of tour in different countries in Latin America for presenting her books, and uh, generously we have this possibility to have Karin with us today. I will just introduce Karin very shortly, so in a more informal way. She's a professor of cultural theory at the University of Arts in Linz, Austria, and she published vastly in different fields, particularly, and was somehow surprising for me, also in publications connected to Latin America. I just mentioned three titles uh, from her books, and this is fascinating titles. Along the titles are, let's say, reason for also know better the books. Prothesen, Figuren einer ledierte Moderne, Prostheses, Figures of one, how do you say, lediertes, not those, yeah, worded modernity. Yeah, and then the next one, or more recently, ones Surazo, Monika and Hans Erd, eine deutsche Geschichte in Bolivien. Monika and Surazo, Monika and Hans, are German history in Bolivia, and all the title quite difficult to translate. Gegen and Common. This, Contra Escape. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so thank you so much, Karin, for joining us in this afternoon for this talk. And Fernando Nina, who is also very known from you fellows and also members of MESILA, kindly offers for commenting on the talk. As you know, Fernando is our senior fellow this year. He was an interim professor at the Department of Ibero-American Cultural Studies at the University of Heidelberg. And as I have just noticed, knows also very well the work of Karin. So this was a quite interesting coincidence. So thank you so much also, Fernando, for delivering this comment on the talk. So we have the talk, the comments, and then we can open the discussion. Karin, please, yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
So thanks a lot. It's really a great pleasure. Also a big surprise that it worked out so well, as it is a bit of a coincidence that I'm here in Sao Paulo at the moment. My publishers will arrive. They made a translation of one of my books, and I'm very happy to be here. I had two opportunities already to talk about this last book, Surazo, with young people and all kinds of persons. And so now I'm also happy to be back in a more academic circle, so to speak. Probably I'll also say that it's a big pleasure for me, as we at the Art University in Linz, we also run a fellowship program in cultural studies. And so it's a bit like I missed my fellow colleagues the last 2 weeks, and now I have kind of replacement colleagues for at least for 2 hours. So thanks for coming. I'm going to present today a chapter or part of a chapter of a book that is not 100% finished, but more or less finished. It has the title at the moment, Mania Metabolica, and is about, is kind of, what I try in this book is to develop an idea of cultural violence after the model of a metabolism. So the core idea is really that cultural violence, which is hard to grasp actually, so we often talk about cultural appropriations or cultural domination, and the figure that I try to develop in this book is that cultural violation is a process that contains of a transformation by way of destruction. like metabolisms, like the act of devouring. So that's in general the idea of the whole book. Easy for you to grasp that it has it establishes a dialogue with an anthropophag discourse that comes from Brazil. It's not a book about Andrade or about anthropophagy in the narrow sense, but I'm very happy that there about this possibility to rethink tropes of cultural theory with South American theories, not only in the background, but also kind of leading into this kind of thinking. So that's just for the broader context. For today, I prepared not a whole chapter, but it's a part of one of the chapters that is about currencies and the question how currencies are, and money in general, are can be conceptualized as a tool, as a specific form of also not only of economic violence, but also the cultural violence that is entangled in the dominance of general purpose money, the US dollar, you can translate if you like. So some currency that has the idea of transferring everything into everything. Okay, I'll read in order not to totally get lost, and we'll have plenty of time to discuss afterwards, I would say. I'm starting with something that I encountered in my childhood, an alleged Cree prophecy that was in the 70s, could be found in many places in Germany and Austria, and also in the US, as I now found out, because there's a lot of different versions of it also in English. And this Cree prophecy says, only when the last tree has been cut down, the last fish been caught, and the last stream poisoned, will you realize you cannot eat money. This alleged prophecy appeared as a sticker on dashboards, on bicycles, in bathrooms, within the so-called alternative milieu of my parents. Or it was also held up in marches in this era when ecological leftist thinking really developed. So that was not a given. It was a subcultural milieu, I would say, where these kinds of wisdoms were shared. It offered the condensed credo of the anti-consumerist eco-movement that developed back then. And nothing, by the way, indicates that it is actually of First Nations origin. There's rather substantial indication that it is one of the many causes of cultural appropriation. So the source of this prophecy cannot really be tracked down. Second instance to start with. The chocolate bar with the alluring name Maya Gold is produced and marketed by the UK candy company Green and Blacks. It was the first commodity to obtain the now widespread international fair trade logo in 2004. So that was the first one to be part of the fair trade logo. No, it's not. It's a, what is it in English? A label. Yes, it's a label. The brand operates in semantic registers that are indebted to the recent development of a market for sustainable and fair trade, high quality foods, green foods. And I will argue that it also refers back to the long history of the promises of exotic stimulants, and to the now resurfing knowledge about the function of cacao in classic Aztec and Maya culture. In Belize, the origin of the beans for Maya Gold cacao planting was revived as an important income to the campesinos, although under the rough conditions of prices dictated by the world market. Growing of cacao, therefore, has a long and complicated history in that region that I will come back to in a moment. The question of how ecological issues were to become broadly acknowledged in the bourgeois European milieu, in large part due to the marketability of organic consumables, is not my central issue here. I'm rather interested in this entanglement of different ideas of value and richness that comes with this bar. So my question is rather, how are consumption and money, gold, silver, chocolate as a consumer good, in tension with each other, as they can both signify wealth? And how are European economic discourses and patterns of consumption shaped and played out by the observation and manipulation of non-European economies? On this, I will build an argument how cultural violence could probably be conceptualized as a metabolic process in a colonial context. I would say a manic process of devouring. One of the traces I will follow with chocolate is the fact that chocolate beans, cacao beans, were used as a currency in Mexico and in Nicaragua for a very long time. So it was at the same time a consumable and a currency. But first, I will frame this a little bit more theoretically. I hope that you're interested in that. Otherwise, I'll just skip it. I don't know how the interests are here. Good. This tension between the necessity of food intake and money as a medium of deferral and exchange is, of course, quite evident. But also the necessity to eat is probably the most universal and most inclusive take on humanness, because it even implies an understanding of humanness or even parahumanness as a shared fate of mortals. And the interesting thing is that the mortals, that was the Greek word for humans. So being mortal, being indebted to food intake for survival, once upon a time was the basis of defining humanness. And it's quite interesting that this feature is shared with non-human animals, because also they have to eat. So that's why I also find it very interesting to think about food intake in cultural theoretical terms. Money and currencies, on the other hand, are clearly part of what we call the cultural sphere. Money relates, expands, and enables individual lives. It is an operator of mediation. And this tension has been investigated rather in social and cultural anthropology than in classical economic theory. So this is also something that I'm very interested in. What can we as cultural theoreticians contribute also to economic debates? And I think that the issue of currencies can be a very good entrance point for this as well. Cultural anthropology studies how a whole myriad of material semiotic actors spring forth, flank, and form an individual life. That's parents, genealogy, cultural and ecological environments, institutions. All these are when, if you like, participants or shareholders of an individual model life. And they are substantially more present in anthropological monetary theories than they are in the scientific discipline economics. Money, we can say, refers even in its most profane and technical versions back to these multiple culturally differentiated relations. Michel Alieta's theory of money as a social bond that I follow here understands money as a node of what he calls vertical and horizontal bonds, and bonds in the sense of indebtedness and of relations. Vertical bonds are those that make up the web of life, the circle of life and death. Vertical bonds, for example, we can think about generations, are usually unalienable and intergenerationally and socially handed down. That's, for example, the worship of ancestors in different cultures. Horizontal bonds, on the other hand, are alienable usually in the sense of convertible, exchangeable, and they connect individuals to each other in the present. And this is what Alieta says is the only sphere that is covered by neoclassical economics. So neoclassical economics doesn't have any idea about history or about how life and death and generations are connected. Hence, we may be able to discern alongside very evident eco-apocalypticism. Here is where I wanted to go. Alongside this eco-apocalypticism and Rousseauian exoticism that is, of course, also present in this proverb, something else, the deep melancholy of money, which carries the mark of a history of violence and a deeply unequal and alienated exchange. Furthermore, the anthropologist Maya Fortes has pointed out something that is enlightening in a perplexingly simple way. He says in one of his texts that those activities we call cultural, in most cases relate additively or serially or cumulatively to the individual body, therefore forming something like an environment. So usually cultural practices are expansions of the individual. And in contrast to this, he says that eating is something everyone can only do for him or herself alone. Eating or devouring can simply not be delegated. And this is why he thinks of it as a concentration of world within a body, whereas most cultural practices are about expanding. This does not mean, of course, that consumption of food is not embedded in culture or that it does not involve a plethora of collective actions, nor does this assertion deny that the act of food intake is a material exchange that takes place in a rather cosmic dimension. No energy from the sun means no growth, no plants, no animals, no food. But he's really talking about the act itself that is strictly linked to the one individual organism and its survival. And this is the thing that is not delegable. With one very significant exception, of course, and that's the nourishment of mother and child. And I think that's also totally understudied, how this is the big exception, although it's, of course, very common. Eating is also a highly time-sensitive act. It is only deferrable to a very limited extent, and thus in existential tension with other cultural social processes, which, as a rule, have a tendency towards durability. So culture is, to a large extent, about durability, not about what's taking place here and now. And money is, of course, a major example of this. Therefore, I argue that eating is a very specific relating and mediating practice. Not only is it more existential and linked to urgencies than many other cultural practices, it also concentrates, or we could say it implodes a vast ecological and political network in an individual organism. And this is why I think that it's a very good thing, if it's a thing, very good concept, very good practice to think along in order to see how cultural transformations through destructions might be working. My entry point today is the destructive force of silver money in the Spanish colonies in the early modern era. That's the backdrop of the historical constellation I will talk about, mining in South America. For example, in the infamous mines of Potosi, I'm sure you're aware of this in broad terms. I will just refer to a couple of details here that might be of interest. In these infamous mines of Potosi, the process was not only destroying the basic resources of the First Nations, of the natives, it was extremely destructive for the health of the miners, as you know. Not only because of the horrifying work conditions in the mines, even more so because of the excessive use of mercury to extract the silver from ore. Until today, the Cerro Rico de Potosi, this is I'm sure you know that, it's a very famous image of Cerro Rico in the image of Mary. So until today, the Cerro Rico is said to, and that's a very famous proverb from Potosi, it's the mountain that devours the miners. And that's been said about this mountain since the 60th century. My argument goes a bit further. Not only does the mountain eat miners because it's so dangerous and because the work is so malign for the health condition, I would say that globalization of money was literally built on the extraction of the life of the miners. Because why was Potosi so important? That was because the production costs of the Spanish silver peso that came from the mountain, from the silver mountain, and that was the first global currency, could only be held low because of the physical exploitation and the consumption of indigenous bodies in forced labor. So it's really a major example of what Jason Moore calls the cheapening of nature, the cheapening of human nature in this sense. What was the role of the silver trade historically? Silver was the very substance that closed the world market. So it was not that much the Spanish Empire that could profit from silver because Spain was broke all the time. Its historical function was to close the world market because it was just about the only item of interest for the Chinese market. And by that really enabled or produced global trade. Before that, the Chinese were not interested in entering trade relations with Spain. They didn't have anything to offer. This is why I would say that the world market is built on the destruction of life in Potosi. There's another story that could be told about indigenous concepts of silver or ore as a product of a planetary or earthly metabolism, but that's a different story that I will leave out today. If you like, we can talk about it in the discussion. So there's another concept that is not that much of a maniac idea of extraction that is in place in Peru. So I'll turn to cacao. And which is as I said, incisive case in which food and money as exchange equivalent coexisted in one medium. As mentioned, cacao was was not only an important part of the ritual life of Maya and the Aztecs, it was both food and drug and a currency. In Linnaeus' scientific classification, Theobroma cacao, this is even recalled because Theobroma cacao, it means food of God. As the cacao tree grows in the forest shade, the plant was associated in Maya and Aztec culture with death and with death as a source for rejuvenation of life. So this the growth in the shadows had this special semantics attached to it. The communal consumption of cacao was a component of the magnificent and ostentative festivities at the Aztec court, which were described by the conquerors before they destroyed what they had encountered. These descriptions were the basis of all kinds of European fantasies about indigenous luxury, by the way. Cacao beans, on the other hand, were in use as money. Along with other goods, they were given as a tribute to regional or super-regional rulers, and their production was regulated locally. So not everybody was allowed to grow money. Beans were used as an everyday means of payment, but they were also used in long-distance trading. In Nicaragua, by the way, until the 19th century, beans were stored in numbered amounts, usually 24,000 beans per sack. They were exchanged at a relatively stable rate, which did fluctuate, though, according to the distance from the place of production. So a bean of cacao would be worth more in some distance to its place of production. As a general medium of exchange, the cacao beans were quite efficient. They had a relatively high value per part by weight. They are easy to transport and to divide up. They have a long shelf life, but cannot be stored indefinitely, which, in addition to their renewable properties, increases the liquidity of cacao money. So it can be managed easily by the sovereign. The consumability was, and that's my main point here, seen as an advantage by European observers. The currency could become unstable, but not too much. For example, when a ruler, Moctezuma II, is known for this, had too many beans in the warehouse, and he could neither consume it nor put them into circulation. But usually, those beans could be used for something else. So there was no danger of inflation. Peter Mathieu, who was one of the first commentators on Abya Yala, emphasized this consumability and their limited shelf life as a means to discourage the hoarding of money. So this is what he writes about the Mexican cacao money. O blessed money, which yieldeth sweet and profitable drink for mankind, and preserveth the possessors thereof free from the hellish pestilence of avarice, because it cannot be long kept hid underground. After the Europeans arrived, the bean currency indeed stabilized even more, because now large numbers of beans could be exported to Europe as consumables, and long storage no longer endangered the value. The Aztec warehouses were, of course, cleared out, and additional production capacities were created by the encomenderos. Right after arriving in Mexico, for example, Hernán Cortés had a cacao plantation laid out already 1519. That was one of his first business ideas. And at first, he did not plant cacao for export, but rather for growing money. Either way, cacao maintained its value during colonial times and was used as small change. The introduction of the Spanish silver currency, on the opposite, the peso, turned out to be quite complicated, not only in contrast to cacao beans, but also to gold, which was in use in Mesoamerica as an exchange equivalent, and because silver was used for everyday objects, such as sandal soles, until the arrival of the Europeans. That means it didn't possess a lot of prestige, so it was not accepted as currency easily. This is why at the beginning of the 16th century, Peter Mathieu saw in the cacao bean currency not an embodiment of the excess and luxury of an exotic society, as for example Georges Bataille did later, but rather an embodiment of a quasi-ecological principle of self-limitation. And that's the idea that I will follow up with, this idea of self-limitation of money in comparison to general purpose money that can be exchanged and crosses borders wherever it can. The context of Mathieu's criticism of the silver peso that is kind of encrypted in this or encoded in this in this sentence. The context of this critique was the frantic turnover of precious metals that held Europe in thrall in the early modern era. Money, gold, and silver had taken on a menacing character in the perception of many European observers. The precious metals came from overseas in large amounts and disappeared rapidly into uncanny channels beyond the knowledge of both lay and learned contemporaries. Why was that? The European ruling houses, especially the Spanish crown, were chronically short of money because the state households, the buildup of the administrative system, and also the ongoing involvement in wars, their expeditions to Abya Yala, this swallowed up vast amounts of the new riches. The state households of the early modern period were financed in part by taxes, but increasingly they were very dependent on private entrepreneurs and private banks. In order to finance their ventures, the European ruling houses were obliged to borrow a lot from private banks. Therefore, it is impossible to separate private banking from state finance in Europe of this period. And with a view to this constellation, Josef Vogel has very conclusively shown that the modern state, the state as we know it now, developed not in opposition, but rather in concert with the modern financial system, or with money as a credit system. Due to the entanglement of the Spanish national economy with banks and credits, it was at times the case that the silver ships that arrived in Sevilla from South America were already completely mortgaged, and the whole cargo went to banks in Genoa and Augsburg. So the ships didn't even enter the harbor; they were unloaded on sea, and all the silver went to Germany and Italy. Although Spain boasted huge quantities of silver in Habsburg times, this did not help the state in terms of wealth or stable treasury. This was the case even though the Spanish crown held a monopoly on silver mining and the silver trade and controlled the famous silver fleet that was fed by the Cerro Rico in Potosi. In addition, since the market was flooded with silver, the peso, the first global currency, as I said, steadily lost value, approximately 50% between 1540 and 1650. This is just a little bit, that's the numbers of how much was brought over. And you can also see another problem was that there was really much contrabanda. There was really of metals as well. So the state was not able to really stabilize its own economy through that. In light of this, it is understandable that not only Peter Mathieu, the guy who had this strong favor for cacao money, and he was even a member of the Consejo de Indias, so he knew exactly what the trade relations looked like. That not only Peter Mathieu, but also other intellectuals, such as the famous Balthasar Gracian, eyed the shower of gold and silver from the New World very suspiciously. And I will only give a little insight into how he talks about silver money in his famous work El Criticon, the Critique. That is, of course, a work that is very, very skeptical about the possibility of rational policing and rational behavior in general, and especially so with regard to the political and economic practices of his time. I'm not going to go into that too much. The story is about a younger and an older man, an experienced man who teaches the younger man what politics is about. This is one of the first scenes that takes place in St. Helena, which was an important stopping point for the Castilian fleet and also a base for the slave trade. And this is how they talk to each other. Critilo says, do not see yonder far off. What is it you see? I see, said Andrenio, the younger one, some wandering mountains or winged sea monsters or else some clouds. No, said Critilo, they are ships, though you have said aptly in calling them clouds, for they rain gold into Spain. So they're talking about the ships that bring the gold and the silver from the home from the colonies. And with this nubes, navets, clouds, ships, correspondence, it becomes very evident that the contingent dynamism Gracian assumes in natural processes, and especially that they also pertain to economy. So the weather and economy are on the same level. Both of them are unmanageable. They are vague. They have decidedly increased with the expansion of the empire in the New World. So that's the first idea we get about silver and gold trade in this book. And it's even worse in one of the later chapters that talks about financial speculation. The financial speculators here find themselves in golden prisons, and they have already squandered their future. So this is why I would say that El Criticón is also a book about the origin of the indebted man and of money as credit. Instead of nourishing himself to live on, the venturer or the speculator, the banker in Gracian eats and drinks money. And Gracian is very clear that this means devouring death. And it's quite interesting that it's more or less the same story that we then find again in the 20th century as in an ecological framework. As he says, very ironically, ways and means have now been found for making gold edible and drinkable. One man has even discovered the art of making broth from doubloons. And they say it is so hearty, it can wake the dead. And he says, in parentheses, the idea to extend life seems quite foolish, though. So he has a very strong idea about the destructive character of the gold and silver trade and its entanglement with financial practices. So both of them link the need to somehow limit monetary transactions to the act of consumption. So Gracian and Mathieu, both of them idealize self-restricting practices to be morally more valuable than the economic regime they experienced in Spain at that time. And it's quite interesting to see that this idea of restricting money is rejuvenated in the 20th century in the anthropology of economy. This is my last part. Then there's only a couple of conclusions. I'm now jumping to the 20th century and how in the 20th century this idea of self-limiting money has been dealt with. It comes in the middle of the 20th century under the umbrella of primitive money. We wouldn't call that primitive money anymore, but I'm here now really interested in this idea of self-restricting money that is connected to the sphere of consumption. In a 1967 essay, Mary Douglas compares the general medium of exchange with so-called primitive currencies. In general, one would assume that money as a generalized medium of exchange tends towards cross-border fluidity and market competition, while local currencies, that means money that is only used for specific means, puts group-specific social control in place and is also stabilizing. The acquisition and circulation of so-called coupons, that's the strange word that Mary Douglas uses for primitive currencies, coupons, Her object of studies, by the way, were raffia cloth of the Lele in Congo that were only used for transactions surrounding wedding. So just to give you an idea, that's her idea of primitive money, that is that you can only do specific things with it. You cannot buy a bar of chocolate. You can only use it to buy a bar of chocolate if you give it in a wedding ceremony. So that's the thing that she has in mind. So these coupons would therefore be more strictly controlled within the communities, as they can only be used for the acquisition of certain goods or services. Douglas emphasizes, however, that even modern currencies, the US dollars, have what she calls coupon qualities. In other words, they are also socially controlled, and they have a controlling effect, and they need a cultural imaginary to function. Not only do individuals imbue also general purpose money with personal or cultural qualities. For example, if you inherit something by your grandma and she wants you only to spend it for a new skirt, you'll do that. So you can use general purpose money also in this sense as a cultural specific, socially bound money. But more interestingly, Douglas also conceptualizes international price politics as functioning analogous to coupon economy. Within a national economy, she says, people trust the self-regulating powers of general purpose money plus the market. But between nations, as soon as we enter the international market, other regulations are in place, regulations that are entangled with economies of debt and power relations that stem from historical developments. So as soon as general purpose money enters the international sphere, we are all part of the whole history of colonial power. And this comes with devastating consequences for local or regional economies, as could be observed in the various debt crises that emerged since the 1980s. Not only did the destabilization of currencies result in an increase of external policing of local economies, but also in an endemic hunger and loss of property in many places. So just to explain a little bit, when, for example, Germany forced Greece to stay in an indebted situation with Germany, it decided that future generations will have to pay back. So they calculated on an intergenerational social fact and not on price security or anything else. So it was really kind of a mistreatment, I would say, of generations that took place when the Germans enforced their monetary policy on Greece. I will now discuss briefly the case of Argentina in the 2000s. In this case, the one-to-one exchange rate with the US dollar caused a truly diabolic economic situation in which poverty and scarcity were a direct effect of surplus production. So Argentina didn't have any problem, really. No economic problem. The economic problems were generated by the international financial market. And after what we have heard up to now, it's probably not that surprising that the whole complex of power-laden currency and international money politics condensed in a currency named after a meal, namely the patacones. You know that. They are double-fried flatbreads made of plátanos. But patacón was also the name for an Argentinian substitute currency in use from 2001 up to 2006. So for 5 years, this patacón currency was used. The patacones were a crisis currency, an answer to state bankruptcy. Patacones number 2, as they were called, were issued as bonds with 7% interest in the province of Buenos Aires in order to equalize the salaries of public employees. So in the beginning, they were used for basic services, so to speak, but they became so popular that you could also buy a car or a McDonald's meal with them. The Argentinian peso had collapsed because of the, as I said, fixed exchange rate with the dollar. Argentinian goods became too expensive on the world market, which led to a consistent trade deficit. Then the rising government debts incurred in equalizing the situation. These credits became ever more expensive because of the negative prognosis for the Argentinian economy, and the national debt continued to rise. And then the Argentinian people no longer trusted the peso. Many tried to change their money into US dollars, which intensified the downward spiral of the peso. And this is when the Patacón entered the scene. The substitute currency was an instrument for allowing the practically intact economic life to continue, and basic needs to be met in the situation of scarcity and official money. So how did the Patacones acquire their name? In Argentina, the word Patacón has been in general and colloquial use for money since the 19th century, alongside plata. And the Argentinian silver currency of the 19th century back then already was called Patacón. Patacones as food are shining with fat and symbolize wealth, just as coins do. And it's from there that the name of the coinage was taken. In the colloquial usage of Patacón, there's always a resonance of worthless or funny money. I'll talk about that for a little bit. It has the taste of being forged as fictional money, make-believe or so. Patacones were reliably in use for years, but they were also considered as strange, amusing money that was actually worth nothing. And that had to do with the fact that the word Patacón for money was very much used by a very popular Argentinian comic figure, by Patoruzú. He's a Tehuelches chief from Patagonia with superpowers, and was created in the 1920s. And along with his physical strength, he is distinguished by his generosity. So bundles of money are always bulging out of his pants pockets, and this is why Patacón is used quite often in this comic. This strange fictional or funny character even extended to the production of parody paper money, on which Patoruzú is shaking with laughter, because of money that was supposedly issued by the República Mano Dura, so the Republic of the Hard Hand. All of this taken together shows that the Patacones can be considered both a result of the crisis and a cultural reflection of the crisis and its causes, and even of the nature of money as something fabricated, something made up. And I think that comes together very nicely in the Patacones of this time. So, conclusions. I set out with Maya Forte's strong argument that the act of eating is a cultural technique of concentration, both in space and time, whereas money is a medium of expansion and deferral. And we now met all kinds of currencies that kind of do both. They are a medium of exchange, but they're either edible or they're very close to the act of consumption. Connecting this to Michel Alieta's argument regarding the deeply social and cultural and power-laden character of money that is conjured away in the abstract construction of price equilibrium in pure economics, I wanted to expand this idea with Maya Forte's argument. Food intake is not only concentration of the web of life and of generations and of life and death within an organism, it is also very highly aware of finality. Without food, humans die. The act of eating is therefore a reminder of that which makes human, mortals in the sense of the Greek word. General purpose money, on the other hand, holds the promise that it can realize value in the future. After an individual death, it is therefore a material semiotic entity that gestures towards both vertical bonds and the violence encrypted in them. My whole argument is not simply in favor of self-restricting currencies. I think that's romanticization. If you think if you use local currencies, you're out of the complicated questions. Rather, it is about making unthinkable economics as we know it. Since consumption cannot be delegated and deferred, since it is about the richness and fragility of living and dying together, since it is about finality, violence, and endurance, the economic discourse and practices that disengage value from corporeality, from the body, finitude and historicity, necessarily become deadly. And I think that's our situation, that with the general purpose money, we're in a deadly situation of unequal exchange that pretends to be equalizing. Practices and discourses that delegate exchange to an allegedly neutral system of accounting, like the neoclassical approach has it, are simply not good enough for our current situation, as they deny all those destructive effects. Also, I take general purpose money as a model case for a cultural artifact that claims worldwide validity and simultaneously is entangled with economic violence, especially if a monoculture of world currency is established as the norm that devours really other forms of generating value, sociability, and meaningfulness. It is therefore a key cultural artifact to demonstrate cultural violence as a destructive transformation, and also with some vertigo and mania attached at the moment. That's it. Shall we?
No.
Are you sure?
Just one thing.
Do you want to use the remote, or shall I?
I only have some pictures. So
You tell me when to forward. I'll be a pusher.
So I have now the very difficult task to comment Karin Harasa's first chapter of her new book that approaches forms of tries to show forms of appropriation that approach the European order in different ways, but that nevertheless consumed it. Yeah, and what I thought is very difficult also for just a philologist like me, a literature guy, is to, like she does, combine history, economy. She even took one of the most, for a literature guy, one of the most difficult books to read from the Siglo de Oro, Gracián. So it's actually, yeah, you say fun. So I mean, she actually just is like surfing, to take this metaphor. She's surfing through so many disciplines in such a smooth way, in a very intelligent way, because all the things she also says about Gracián. So what I'm trying to say is that I'm actually commenting from my point of view, and what I thought is maybe what I could do is, I mean, one focus of her considerations on cultural theories that is on cultural theories that understand culture and the production of science as physical processes. Yeah, and I will concentrate also on this production of science. So I would like to commend her model of cultural violence as metabolic, highlighting also some other aspects of the colonial processes of transformations that necessarily passed through phases of destruction till our times, following her main argument that cultural processes cannot be decoupled from economic processes. I think that's like the main, her main argument here. And I will concentrate on other aspects that I think maybe are interesting for our discussion also later on. That means I'm commenting that, also remembering, like Brazilian thinker Beatriz Nascimento said, that it is important to understand the history of our continent, not only from the perspective of domination, but also from the perspective of its resistance. And to illustrate my thoughts, I have therefore, since Karin also has some protagonists, I also have brought 4 protagonists, and my first protagonist is Magallanes. So I will start with him. First, Magallanes. One of the main drivers of the conquista was the search for precious metals. If we want to measure the impact of colonization, globalization, world system, it is enough to read the document Reimagining Our Futures, a new social contract for education by the UNESCO from 2022, in which all the nations of the world are informed about the harmful consequences of this system on nature. It is worth noting a fact as current as the message of the UNESCO report. It is about the urgency of producing green fuel for the change of planetary energy metrics by 2050, but locating the territory in which such production is projected, the Strait of Magellan and Tierra del Fuego. I focus here on the fact that this strait is a chronotype of the mondialization, globalization process of colonial modernity. As we know, Magellan's passage through this strait in 1520 was a milestone in the interoceanic connection sought by the Spaniards to participate in the coveted and disputed world market of spices coming from the east. Today, something quite similar is happening. The Strait and Tierra del Fuego are once again gaining strategic global value due to the need to produce green hydrogen on a large scale. Why are several transnationals generating projects there? Because Chile is the second country in the world that can produce this fuel at lower cost. China is the lowest cost producer. China's political and economic relations with Europe and the United States allow us to understand why the Western world is interested in the production that can be extracted from Chile. Even more so because China has also entered the race to position itself in this southern region. Thus, as at the end of the 15th century, Eastern goods are presented to Europe as an object of desire with which it cannot be satisfied. And as in the 16th century, the Chinese disembark in the new continent looking for the possibility of trading on a global scale, but imposing their conditions on the market. Then and now, America appears on the map as the supplier of what the West and the East desire and deny each other. Now, all the projects proposed for the Magellan area are designed as extractivist enclaves, self-absorbed in production, but open to commercialization and maximum global profitability of what is extracted at the minimum geopolitical and economic cost. It is a production system with its own plants, ports, shipping fleets, and markets, quite like the extractive design of the Portuguese factories or enclaves established from the 15th century onwards in Africa, India, and Asia. The commercial model they propose is planetary, like the Portuguese, but sustained today by the technology of the most advanced phase of capitalism. However, in the 21st century factory design, it is up to Chile to provide the raw material without any restriction, as well as to assume all the negative social and natural costs. It is up to Europe and the USA to take possession of the fuel of the future and to continue enjoying their welfare state, and to China to counteract the empire of the West. In this déjà vu of the colonial chronotype of neoliberal modernity, East and West are fighting another of their battles. So my second protagonist is Bartolomé de las Casas. Bartolomé de las Casas, from a merchant family based in Seville, was born around 1484. He came to La Española with the colonist fleet under Nicolás de Ovando in 1502. He became hacendado, encomendero, and slave owner. Although he was ordained a priest in 1510, he initially defended the practice of encomiendas and the genocidal exploitation of the Taínos, and took part in the conquest of Cuba under Pánfilo de Narváez. Only the monstrous atrocities he had to witness convinced him that injustice was being done. He gave up his encomienda and tried in vain to persuade his compatriots to do the same. He decided to go to Spain in 1515 to defend his position at court. In fact, he managed to worry the advisors of the young Charles V so much with his reports that they sent 3 Hieronymites to Hispaniola to take over the government. He himself was given the official title of Protector de los Indios. But the reforms did not have the effect that Las Casas had promised. Las Casas fully shared in what might be called the land, gold, and ideological complex of the average conquistador poblador, in the psychic complex that underlay the expansionist drive of the First World Empire, that of Catholic Christian Spain. To compensate the settlers who were already there for the loss of their encomiendas, each settled should be allowed a license to import from Spain black slaves, each to help them with their urgent needs. This plan for this peasant migration was adopted in a royal decree. Thus, in 1518, as a direct result of his proposals, the Spanish crown granted a license to a Flemish courtier called Gouvenant, which gave him permission to import 4,000 African slaves, trade named negritos and negras, into the Indies. Since this license was also a form of negotiable currency, Gouvenant at once sold off a part of it to some Genovese merchants in Seville who were linked to the slave trading houses in the Cape Verde Islands of the Guinea coast, whilst the Flemish faction at court, who strongly backed Las Casas, had no vested interest in the New World and encomienda and intra-Caribbean slave trading system, as did the Spanish consulars. Flemish capital had just begun to be invested in the slave trade out of Guinea, with the Portuguese supplying manpower and ships. In other words, at wider levels, historical processes were already at work, in whose context, instead of the strictly regulated individual licenses to be awarded to those species and settlers who built sugar mills, the large-scale importations of negros bozales directly from Africa had been set in motion. Las Casas' protest at this distortion of his original intention was unavailing. So here it's important to see how immediately this license process started, and I wanted to highlight that. So the next protagonist is some that everybody here already knows, because I already presented him at the annual meeting, but I thought he's an important one, Wamampuma. And Karin also knows him, of course. She has in her preface also talked about Wamampuma. In 1615, a manuscript entitled El primer Nueva Crónica y Buen Gobierno, compuesto por Don Felipe Wamampuma de Ayala, Señor y Príncipe, was sent as a letter to the Spanish king by indigenous writer Wamampuma. Probably the most remarkable aspect of this handwritten text are the 399 pen and ink drawings made by the author himself, which make the Primer Crónica an impressive 1,200 pages long. The most famous drawing of the Primer Crónica is Wamampuma's Mapa Mundi of the Andean world. The Mapa Mundi del Reino de las Indias is a world map which does not have Rome or Jerusalem as its center, but Cusco. By means of his cartographic representation, Wamampuma fixes the Andean cartographic imagination, preserves the Andean worldview, and thus subverts the colonization of his spatial semantics. In a famous food scene, Wamampuma shows the conqueror's obsession with gold. Gold has a universal value for the Spanish conquistadors because it measures the value of all things in the world, and at the same time makes them interchangeable and exploitable through gold. Wamampuma reinterprets the madness of this gold fetishism by ascribing a logic to man's most natural need, food, that contradicts gold as money. In Wamampuma's painting, the Inca asks Candia, one of Peru's conquistadors, in both astonishment and challenge, Huayna Capac kai kuritaki mikunki, este oro comes, do you eat this gold? Candia answering, Este oro comemos, we eat this gold. I want to describe this writing and drawing of Huamampuma with the term ethos barroco, Baroque ethos by the Ecuadorian Mexican philosopher Bolivar Echeverria. The term ethos has the advantage of its ambiguity or double meaning. In the basal meaning, refugium and protection, it refers to the defensive or passive recourse, with the meaning weapon to an offensive or active recourse. The Baroque ethos does not accept the exploitative dimension of colonization. Baroque is the way that allows modernity to survive the destruction of the qualitative produced by capitalism productivism by transforming this destruction into a creative access to another dimension of the qualitative that is challengingly, subversively, resiliently imaginary. The Baroque ethos is a social structural behavior and a response to the irreconcilable character of the contradiction that characterizes the central drama of an epoch or a culture. This response is characterized by Echeverria as the choice of a tertium non datur, an excluded third party. The imaginary establishes a playful, ludic scenario in which the certainty of the world as something given gives way to its arbitrary, theatrical character. A second-order drama is installed in what is perceived, whose energy transcends the boundaries of reality. The establishment of a new unquestioned and questioning agreement requires the creation of a new spatial order, a new pictorial order. This is exactly what Huamampuma is doing. On this basis, he can postulate the construction of new images and topoi as an informal counter-discourse, as tactical disobedience to the progressive destruction of his life world and its modes of reproduction. Decolonized colonial currency is Baroque disobedience. And I think here, I was thinking he's probably not that far away from these nubes from Gracián. So it's important to see that actually also in indigenous thought, this was already very present. Yeah. And thank you. The last protagonist will be Malintzin. La Chingada, the one who sold herself to the Spaniards as betrayed her own. This image of the Malintzin, she lived from 1500 till 1529, or better known as the Malinche, is still very present in Mexican society and abroad. Yet she is also associated with characteristics of intelligence, beauty, and mastery of several languages. Sold as a slave at a young age, the young indigenous girl was given to the conquistador Hernán Cortés and his companions along with 19 other women, and came to occupy a role of importance for translation between the conquistadors and the indigenous people. Heroine or traitor, the Malintzin has been and remains a controversial figure in Mexican history and society. Her image is marked by discrepancies. The lienzo of the Florentine Codex presents Malintzin at the center of the actions and images. One must emphasize that she is the one who speaks. The symbol of the virgula is added, which appears in the codices to show speech, the dialogue. In addition, and she is the one who speaks next to a mute, diminished, and passive Cortés on the margin of the scene, she is also in an elevated place which alludes to her important position. She appears with her back to Cortés and is turned towards an indigenous man who is lower down and with whom she converses, which is illustrated by the virgules of the two indigenous characters. This scene illustrates a situation in Tecnotitlan in the 16th century. The question remains, what is being exchanged here? What is the currency and where lies the real value? Malintzin is often represented with gestures or virgules that suggest translation and communication. In addition, she appears as a guide for Cortés and the Spaniards, accompanying him, pointing out directions. She is represented as an acting subject. It is Malintzin who has Cortés, as Bolivar Echeverria emphasizes. He and the other conquistadors depended completely on her translations and skills of mediation and negotiation. Their knowledge of indigenous customs and politics was invaluable to the Spaniards, and their knowledge of languages and the Mesoamerican world was essential for communication between indigenous people and Spaniards. These aspects connect with Bolivar Echeverria's definition of culture as critical cultivation of identity. Malintzin cultivo crítico de la identidad. Malintzin made communication between the two sides possible and encouraged them to open up and to understand and question each other. She behaved in a certain sense like a Tlatoani. Moctezuma was the Tlatoani. This is the Aztec emperor, and Tlatoani means the one who speaks. That's what Tlatoani means. Entering conversation and negotiations with indigenous leaders. This position was not foreseen for a woman, much less a slave woman, and in addition, she spoke for the newcomers, being of origin from the same lands as the peoples with whom they were allied or confronted. However, not only did she present a contradiction to their system for the indigenous people, she also did not fit into the idea of domination and conquest with which the Spaniards arrived in the Mesoamerican world. Malintzin, despite being a slave, a woman and an indigenous woman, presented herself to the Spaniards as an intelligent woman, a speaker of several languages, and in addition, very skilled at conversing and negotiating with the Mesoamerican elites. She and many other Indians fulfilled the need for survival, since the Spaniards needed to be guided and fed by the Indians. In addition, she also played an essential role in the linguistic factor, as she made the colonizers dependent on her and other Indians, a process that contrasted with their idea of domination. She produced semantization processes with excess meaning that made possible, as Echeverría says, to contain violence at least for over a year, till the destruction of the Aztec Empire was inevitable. So, as you saw, I commented on different topics, Karin, and I think you can resume it as extractivism, license trade, Baroque ethos, and language. So maybe that would be like my suggestions also to dialogue now with all the others. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know, Karin, if you want to react to his comments, or you should open the floor for, because the comments are actually, let's say, lateral to the to your talk, so they touch the talk, but in a more abstract way. So therefore, don't know.
I can say something, then everybody can think of his or her questions. Probably just one thing that or two things. The one thing is that that I really agree with Echeverría being probably the most interesting cultural theoretician to work on issues like this, because he also has a very material idea of culture and of science and how they are employed in political context. So I totally go along with this. Just probably a small note on de las Casas, because in the relating to his idea on of saving lives, that is of course very close to what I'm thinking along. So he was really a biopolitical thinker, I would say, probably the first really biopolitical thinker. And because all his projects about so-called saving the Indians were about saving their lives. It was not so much about kind of their Würde, their dignity. He was really thinking a lot about saving their lives. And it's quite interesting that in one of the letters to Charles, he really develops an idea of how to establish a model of both spiritual and biopolitical sustento. So he calls both sustento, both the evangelization and this kind of life under supporting policies. So I came to observe of Las Casas a bit different after reading a lot of his texts. This is quite utilitarian. It's not that he is so much an abogado, a lawyer to the Indians, he really kind of developed ideas on how to better exploit them. Like very with a strong focus, of course, that is said. But it was not so much on respecting their culture, respecting their difference or anything like this. It was really, he said to Karl, oh, you have to establish better modes of extracting the labor. It's not a good way you do it, the encomenderos that put too much pressure and that extract their life. So yes, that's probably just a footnote that De las Casas is not my hero anymore.
No, but I also wanted to change
Yes,
his
yes.
away from encomendero to defender has, of course, economic
Yes.
arguments behind.
So I think he's really an important player, but not as the good guy, in my perspective.
It wasn't also mine.
Yeah.
So the floor is open for questions, and I'm sure that questions in Spanish are also welcome,
Sí, sí,
because
claro.
for those who speak Spanish, Marcial. Yeah. É necessário?
We're recording.
Well, so many thanks. I'm Torres, one of the senior fellows of MESILA this year. So many thanks for your sharing your thoughts with us. I'd like to push you for our maybe political science or international politics. And this is my field, of course. And so I feel myself more comfortable in this space. But I like to provoke you. In this sense, I like to start with Karl Marx, the first book. Sorry, Krista. Sorry, Krista. Where Marx made a huge research on the currencies and the history of the currencies. Yes. And I like to listen you about it, if you touch Marx in some way. But following this, my argument, I'm thinking in terms of political science and international politics. So taxes are currencies, and currencies and taxes means imperialism. The first way of imperialism, or one of the ways of imperialism present in the world, is taxes, currencies, impose norms and control of territories. So all these kinds, all this spaces create such a level of symbolic or symbolism. And when you proposed the of Argentina, in Brazil in 1991, we had a president, an elected president, called Fernando Collor, and the first or the second decision made by him was confiscate all savings for all population. And he changed it. Actually, he promised to restore the savings of the population 1 year from now, in 1991. In meanwhile, he created or recreated currencies, a cruzado. No, it was cruzado, and then we have Cruzeiro Novo. And again, it was such a, not a coupon, but in some way a new currency with a new symbolic, because we are living a new political term, and we are living the oh my goodness, el golpe militar. He was the first elected president before after the 1964. And the last question I was thinking about, and soft power from Kenneth Waltz, because I was remembering in thinking about Bretton Woods. Bretton Woods in the late 70s changed all currencies and values in the world. And suddenly, from night to the day, the dollar became the major symbolic currency in the world. So I like to listen to you about these questions and about these ideas. Thank you.
it's okay if you collect some questions, or it's
I mean,
preferred to answer directly.
In
It's
this
fine.
case, I would like to answer because
Okay,
it's
yeah, go
already
ahead. Yeah.
a whole cosmos. Otherwise, I'm also happy to collect. Thanks a lot. That's very inspiring. And I'm not sure whether I can answer any of those questions or comments precisely, but I think we're thinking along the same lines in many ways. As for Marx on currencies, I have studied not Marx directly, but Alieta's take on Marx. So Alieta refers back to Marx, so I kind of indirectly, I think I follow Marx. What I studied is another segment in Marx, and that is where he talks about metabolisms. It's quite an important thing for him because his whole idea of capital and capitalization is really a lot related to his thoughts on how natural cycles are redone by capital-intensive economic processes. So that was super important for me to see that Marx had a very clear idea, an interesting idea, how capitalization and the development of surplus needs is always kind of based on diminishing or in altering natural processes. So I think the part that is probably the most interesting one is all about fertilizations, and he really develops his idea of surplus money, surplus value compared to the question, what does fertilizers do with agriculture? So this was very important for me, more than the currency debate that I don't know that well. As for the new currency to symbolize a new order, yes, that's also very heavy in the background, and I couldn't elaborate on that too much today, but I'm really super interested in how this like the imaginary surplus of currencies is communicating with political discourses. So this chapter then goes into a different direction. It ends more or less with this, also with the question of how do we, how can we really take serious that the monetary imaginary is as important as that what economics see in money. So that's more or less my whole point, to say, okay, they are always talking about exchange and price equilibriums, but what about all the rest? And one could say all the rest, the life and the death, the power relations, the history, the intergenerational questions, they are kind of dropped into the imaginary aspect of money. And so thanks a lot for this story of reinventing a country and instantly putting a new currency that signifies this new order. Bretton Woods, yes, it's also in the in the background, but that's probably a too big question. It's, how the US dollar became both a completely a value system, completely independent from any material base, because that's of course what Bretton Woods did, kind of cutting the relation between the money and the gold depots, and how this connection enabled the US dollar to become like something like a neutral equivalent. That's of course totally in the background of this chapter. So like, it is not neutral, we all know that. So everything is still in there, but it is treated in economic theory as if it was a neutral exchange medium, and that's what really interests me, how that can work, and how it is then supported by both discourses and practices and our everyday economic doings, so to speak. Somehow.
So, Marcia, I will take your ball and keep on Marx. No, in that sense, like I think what you said, this process of metabolism and the currency, I think that, yeah, thinking currency in terms of like the circulation of money. In that sense, I think that circulation of money, and not only in terms of hoarding, like accumulating money in one place, but like keeping money in circulation in capitalism is also like the base that this metabolism can actually continue in that sense. Like, yeah. And the second point is exactly, I think that, yeah, making the point with the Bretton Woods is that, yeah, when we were talking about the silver mining, and you were referring very clearly to the labor made in the mines, and showing like behind silver was actually like, you know, labor time and forced labor, and also this also how you probably like think, you know, that we can also relate money to labor, like since money, like, yeah, at least also in Marx times and until Bretton Woods, in that sense, was connected to a concrete commodity, which was gold. And exactly what does it mean then? No, like since 70s, when with the Bretton Woods, then you unpeg dollar from the concrete commodity, and you also somehow like, yeah, unpeg it, disconnect it from like visibility and understanding that there is a labor behind like producing this commodity. And yeah, I'm thinking, yeah, all this financialization and making money out of money, and how this possibility to connect money to labor actually also gets broken.
Can I add a short point
Yeah,
to this?
this is possible.
Well, yeah, thank you so much. Really fascinating. That I assume that perhaps my questions are treated in other chapters. So therefore, because in one specific case you mentioned that you were not going into this just in this talk, but I somehow, yeah, became curious, and then I know this. But first, to what is related to Krista's question is the fact that because you say now I'm going to the 20th century, and what about the 21st century and the different, let's say, currencies? Perhaps it's not currencies, really money, such as cryptocurrency, and also more abstract forms of money, which connected to these sort of chains of investments and so on. And at the end, you don't know exactly where the money is and who actually wants this money, because it's a sort of secret. And so the question will be how this idea of metabolism works also in this very intertwined, but at the same time abstract circuit of money. Mm-hmm. So the idea of expansion, it's not necessarily there. Things are more diffuse and so on. Mm-hmm. Don't know if. Mm-hmm. And the other question, it's when you mentioned the silver money, and with this image that the mountain eats miners. And then you said, no, that there is another dimension on this. So I'm curious if this is dimension what I was thinking. So, because at the end, the miners also, or at least mining activities, eat the mountain and the whole planet. So if you're thinking that at the level of let's say at the global circuit, it's true that mountain eats miners, but at the planetary level, you have actually mountain in this, let's say, abstract sense as the planet eating everything.
Yes.
But this is perhaps the
No,
the top of the other chapter.
I like it a lot. I like your questions a lot.
Yeah.
So the first answer, I think that would connect both your second and your question. What about the labor and the physical nature of humans in the in view of the abstraction of money? So we could probably reframe it. I would probably give a very Marxist answer, in the sense that I think that that we have the feeling that money is abstract and technical, and that money generates itself is just a distraction from the very fact that bodies and metals and earths and territories are still everywhere. So this is really probably one of the most diabolic side effects of neoclassic economics is the very fact that we think that money is something abstract, or something that can be produced by digital processes and by betting on derivatives. But of course, the bodies and the labor and are still there, and they are in a very bad shape. So that also connects to your last question. So that was the whole point, to bring back into the discussion the very existence of people with bodies, a planet with its whole materialities. And I really think it's one of the worst tricks that that this sort of economy plays on us, to make us think it's also everything is up there in the clouds, in abstractions. I don't think so. But I think I lost probably your first point. What was that? Yes. Yes, and the thing with hoarding and circulation, I didn't bring that out that clearly. For me, it was interesting to see that people like Mathieu and Gracian, they clearly saw that something was happening with wealth and with money. And they had a very interesting sense of hoarding and circulating comes together in a very menacing way. So that I found so interesting, because, and then also that they kind of found the same images as we now still use to characterize the violence of this whole this very idea that hoarding is circulating and is borrowing and putting credits and speculating on future returns. That's quite something, I think, that they sensed it, that something fundamentally was going on in their time. Yes.
No, I think you actually, Sergio, already asked my question, but I think I got to it through another path. So just I found it interesting what you said about cacao, because this reminds me that in ancient China, tea had a similar role, right? It could be also a currency for several reasons, because it traveled well, depending on how you produce it. If it was fermented and pressed, it would travel well, and it was accepted and as a currency, a sort of general equivalent or something like that. I don't know the expression exactly in Marx, and I think more importantly, because it was accepted as tribute or as taxes. So in a way, we can think of money as something that is, it is money if it is accepted as tax. If you can pay taxes with it, it is money. And then this brought me to cryptocurrencies, because then we are thinking about a currency that is not backed by a national economy or not backed by a state or central bank. And I know, well, you're not going all the way into those issues, but it would be interesting to think this, the way this way you're approaching the issue, to think of cryptocurrency as well as like kind of very abstract money, which is definitely not edible. Maybe might be similar to some fad diet in California. I don't know, like just breathing in and taking sunlight or something like that. Yeah, that's it. And just other two very random comments. to this day in Brazil, cacao is slang for money, and we also use the expression
What?
cacao is
Cacao,
slang
okay.
for money as well.
Thank you.
Not very updated. Yeah, it's kind of old, but people still say it. You might still hear it in some places, depending on. And also pataca, patacões, and meia pataca
That's
for something
close.
that is worth
Yes.
as well.
That's the same root. So pataca and
It's the same root from
Yes,
patacones,
yes,
yes. Patacones used to be
It has two
also,
roots.
yeah. And then meia pataca is something that is worthless, half a patacone, right?
Yeah. So thanks for this. And yes, let's go into this question of cryptocurrencies. And I think the first thing that one could probably say that cryptocurrency, that when the silver peso ate the miners in order to be produced on a low cost, we can simultaneously think of cryptocurrencies eating a lot of natural resources in order to magically produce values, because that's what they do. Water, electricity, energy. So of course they are also very hungry. Cryptocurrencies are very hungry when it comes both to the material basis of it, and this is why I would say the metaphor of the cloud is a pure euphemism. So because of course currencies, they always eat something, they always digest something, and we should not believe that they don't. So but something to probably go into a bit further. I have a PhD student who is currently working on the metaphor of the cloud and how that relates to the putting up infrastructures for server farms. She delivered her PhD today. She wrote me via email, so I will know more about that in a week.
I'm going to ask you a very open question, because it was discussed in the colloquium before, and also because you mentioned Germany and Greece, and Walter Steinmeier was recently in Greece and the issue of reparations was raised. So just wanted to ask you, what is your take on reparation? I'm really interested in it because I'm studying the restitution of cultural belongings. So I'm really interested in the understanding cultural violence. So just a very open question.
Yeah, wow, big one. Big one. What to say? The big question there, I think, is whether this idea of reparation as something that can restore or can be exchanged with former violence, whether that will work. So my first answer would be, if that worked out, I'm totally in. But knowing that money has this own vicious and strange dynamism attached, I sometimes wonder whether this will fulfill the task. And I'm a bit skeptical whether even if reparations are being paid hard enough, because it's a lot of plata, a lot of patacones that we would have to come up with, but we could probably, if we really want. I still am not 100% sure whether this does the job. Because what I sense in debates on reparations or repatriation of cultural goods, that there's one message enfolded in many of those debates, and that is, stop treating us as minor partners in a conversation. So it's really a lot about fully respecting somebody in the not only in a conversation, but in the way we do things together. And this makes makes for me a bit of an unbalance, because I think that money has its own dynamics, and it doesn't necessarily lead to this equalization of two people being in a process of revisioning their highly hierarchical and unequal common history. What's a complicated sentence, but I think that's the situation. We have a common history, with very unequal results from this history, and seeing in my research what money does and cannot do, I'm simply not sure it can do the job. I mean, it's a hope that it could, and that's already part of our imaginary of money, that can kind of equalize and equalize by giving money. That's at the core of our monetary imaginary. So I give money to you, and then we're quit in German, and we're equal. But it never works, because money is part of a gift economy as much as it is a mathematical entity. And this is also a bit where I wanted to go, to show that this aspect of a gift economy, that it always comes with strings attached, with cultural meanings, with the history of violence. This we will not get rid of, I fear. So it's a very humble answer.
But as we also have discussed in this colloquium on reparations, also the question where the money for reparation come from. So perhaps also from violent processes, because of the interconnections between different circuits and so on. So at the end, you pay a reparation, creating new violations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Money never is unschuldig, is without.
Yeah.
Is never innocent. So
Yeah.
money is, that's what, of course, they try to tell us. Money is an innocent and neutral exchange means, but it's not.
I have
Okay.
two
Yeah, go
questions, if I may. Yeah, thank you very much. It was very interesting listening and also reading. I had the privilege of reading the chapter beforehand, so look on Oswald Andrade, anthropophagy, and so on. This would be the second part. The first part, I was also thinking together with Sergio, Joaquin, about cryptocurrencies, of course, because then we almost, the impression is that currencies have become more abstract. So from food to gold to dollar to Bitcoin. So it just becomes more abstract and less material, apparently, because then you have all these cables under the Atlantic Ocean and the clouds, which are actually servers and so on. But the impression is that it becomes more abstract. And then this is my first question about the temporality of the currencies. I really enjoyed reading that the cacao, it could be stored, but not too much, and not indefinitely, and not. And then as these currencies become more abstract, their temporality also changes, because they can be more stored for more time, but they also can be exchanged faster. So if you take food, it spoils in a certain time. As for like Bitcoin, it's immediately, and even the currency itself is so unstable that you don't know the value anymore. It changes from day to day. So this would be the first. I would like to hear more about these temporalities of the currencies. If you could talk a bit about that. The second is just a hypothesis, thinking on this relation between consumption and sociability and working together. Because there is a kind of consumption that is continuity, like the ritual anthropophagy, or the anthropophagy, the statical anthropophagy would be a way of incorporating the point of view of the other. So it's not the full destruction of the other. There is a generational continuity. As far from this capitalist modern perspective, as Sergio mentioned, it's more like about really destroying, eating these bodies, and also the mountain is destroyed in the process. This is what's more fascinating. It becomes hollow, extractivism. So the whole planet becomes hollow. It's like a planetary mind. So maybe there are two ways of consumption. One is more in a metabolism that's more self-regulatory and it changes, but it has a continuity, and the other is about the full destruction of the other.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That gives me the possibility to expand a bit on the whole perspective of the book, and that's really what it tries to carve out. That there is consumption, devouring, that has this manic quality, this frenzy of destruction that. I think it's not hard to see that this comes with coloniality, extractivism, and so on. So it's a kind of a form of consumption that destroys and doesn't leave a lot behind. Rubbish, a dead mountain, sick and dying people. So this is one form that I kind of tried to track down, and then there's the other form that you've reframed with the anthropophagic image. And what I tried to do in each chapter is to see where we could get to if we took the more relational, the circular, continuous way of devouring stronger in account. And so, for example, for the Cerro Rico chapter, there's also a part then in the chapter on how the indigenous miners conceptualize ore as the ore as being the product of a planetary metabolism, and how they that changes also their way of going after the metals, and how they connect even in worship, even in their daily practices. They have to kind of restore the equilibrium with the tierra, with the mountain they are working in. So this always comes as a countercurrent in all of the chapters. But I try to be aware and not romanticize, also because I'm fully aware of my European vision of it. So I don't want to again exploit some too general indigenous knowledge in order to make it easier for me. So it comes in as a countercurrent all the time in order to also show that this is not only one singular discourse, but it has its resistances, it has its other actors. But still, I don't feel entitled to use that like in the sense of an ecological romantic idea that will save us, because it will not. It would be good to be more aware of it and to give it more space in academic discourse, totally. But let's not hope that the cannibal will save us. I cannot hope for this as a European. So
I guess these were wonderful final words. Concluding with this, let's say, open end. Thank you so much again, Karin, also Fernando, and all of you. Yeah, we'll see each other, I guess, in 3 days. Yeah, for the wiki colloquium. And thank you very
thanks
much.
a lot for
and
the
we're
conversation.
looking very much forward to the book.